Hey, Guy Powell here, and welcome to the next episode of the Backstory on Marketing and AI. And if you haven't already done so, please visit prorelevant.com and sign up for all of these episodes and podcasts. As you know, I am the author of the up and coming new book, The AI Marketing Machine. And if you'd like more information on that, please go to marketingmachine.prorelevant.com. Today I'm interviewing Omar Johnson. He's with Opus Intelligence. And let me tell you a little bit more about him. So he's the founder and CEO of Opus, and which is an AI-powered marketing platform built to empower marketers with culturally aware insights and enable more authentic and effective campaigns. Johnson previously served as the CMO of Beats by Dre and vice president at Apple. Wow, what a background. Omar, thank you so much for being here. It's going to be great to talk with you.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. Good to see you.
Absolutely. So, tell me what your backstory is on AI and marketing. How did you get into this mess anyway?
That's a great one. So background-wise, my marketing career has all been very traditional marketing, right? So traditional, and I learned it from some of the best, the CPG space, right? Consumer packaged goods, Coca-Cola, Kraft, Campbell's. I always have admired the way they take a random product and you build a brand out of it, right? So if you think about the commoditized things that those companies make, the magic is really the brand you put on top of it. So I learned pretty authentically how do you take almost anything and build a brand around it. Next chapter was Nike. And what was interesting with Nike is Nike is amazing at storytelling. So I learned how to storytell from a product perspective, right? How do you tell the story of what air means for basketball or what an outsole means for running? And I did that for 7 years. And then Beats for me was, I'll be honest, guy, it was an experiment. I was a pretty junior marketer, brand manager when I left, and I got thrust into a CMO role. And for me, it was, could I bring it all together? Could I bring together the background on consumer packaged goods, storytelling at Nike into a new category? And that new category was Beats. Now, from a context perspective, Beats was the whole category was $700 million when I got there, right? And I left, it was $10 billion. So we grew the pie, if you will. And then Apple, I'd say technology started to become more important to me at Nike with the whole shift towards social media communication and earned media. So I was always in these bleeding edge groups, and Nike was the first company that introduced me to technology. Obviously, being a part of Beats, which was technically a technology company, right? Although I think we were much better at marketing than technology. You start getting more immersion into the just thinking more like an engineer and thinking less like a cool creative person. Obviously, Apple is one of the best technical technology operators on a planet. That was a great sort of learning ground. But the pinnacle experience for me was when I was on the board of a company called Qualtrics, and they're an enterprise software company. I learned so much between them and at the time, one of their investors, SAP. So between those two companies, they created a pretty insatiable appetite to, as a marketer, I can keep making more money per hour, or I can deploy my marketing knowledge at a scale of enterprise software. So once you kind of get that bug, it's kind of hard to back away from it. And that's how I got here.
Wow, what a background. Those are some big names, that's for sure. And it's so interesting when you get that foundation, so to speak, from the CPGs, which are, definitely some of the best marketers in the world. And then I like your point about, it's not only, how to market, but then how to tell a story. And I like your thinking about, what you learned at Nike to be able to tell that story in a way that really makes sense for your products and your brands.
Yeah. And back to the point on McKinsey, I think when you become really good at it, whether it's the CPG marketing or Nike, as much as everything feels very new and the idea is always innovation and marketing innovation, you start to see the patterns, right? You start to, like the Matrix, see the numbers come down the screen where it's not all different things, right? You actually can interpret marketing at a patternistic level. And then your innovation that you're trying to create really becomes like nuances of old things. And I think when you get to that place in marketing, it's a pretty special place because then you start to realize, like, as magical as you may make yourself, there's actually a bit of a system that's happening and if you know there's a system happening, you see those patterns,
Mm,
why would you not use technology to aid and abet,
yeah.
right? Your speed, your precision, and your ability to scale.
Yeah. Well, to your point about McKinsey, I worked for one of their competitors, A.T. Kearney, for a while, and their process is not only to get to the answer, because you're absolutely right. The senior guys on our team, I was a low level guy, and the senior marketers or the senior consultants, they knew what the answer was within like 10 seconds. They'd been done it, they'd done it before, and they'd been there before, and they knew where it was going. And okay, there might have been some, polish around the edges, but their process was to make sure that their solution would be able to be sold into the company, because there's always naysayers, and they're going to say, well, that's not going to work because blah blah blah, and you say, no, 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 it is, and here's the data, to prove it. And so it's really their process is not only to come up with an answer, get it polished, but also to sell it, widely across the whole company.
Agreed. Agreed. But this is what you just spoke of is what shapes the AI adoption challenge, right? So when you think about big
Yeah,
broad
yeah.
adoption, right? It's you can't go into your boss and say, Claude told me, right? That's probably not going to do well for you because your boss is going to say, well, I got Claude too, right? But if you go back to what I'm saying about the explainability of what you did with whether it's Claude or Mistral or Llama, that's where, you come across as, well, you drove the process, but you use this as a tool to help you scale and speed your process. And it helps you on to your point, the socialization side, because you're able to
Mm.
walk people along your journey.
Yep. So you've got an incredible background, but now you're at Opus Intelligence. Tell us about that.
Great. So Opus Intelligence is a generative AI tool which is built to solve marketing. Now, when I say solve marketing, that sounds like a big surface area, right? Marketing for me has two major components. One, which is what I know about my consumer and who they are and how I target them. And the opposite side is then what do I create, right? To get them engaged with my product or service or whatever it may be. Our system works to do both, to understand your consumer, your product category, macro trends that live around it, and then helps you think about how do you smash those things into a brief to then whether you're driving a human creative or generative machine, give it a very specific prompt and groups of information to help it get to the right answers on the opposite side, right? When I think about my job in this company, it's been more to tame the LLMs and have them give you differentiated answers based on you and an unaided prompt that you may write into one of these machines. So Opus Intelligence is a series of tools that takes you from what's your marketing problem to here's some viable outputs that not only have what the traditional LLMs would give you from I read the internet, here's how other people have done it, but then what's Omar Johnson's special sauce? I'll give you some versions of it. Like for me, I typically start with earned media. Our
Mm.
recommendations typically start with earned media. Now, when I say it, it sounds obvious, right? But most people start with paid media, as you know, right? Because, well, the first question is like, what's my budget? You put that in, it gives you an output. Well, you're probably not going to get a breakthrough answer if you start with what's my budget and you pop it into a machine, right? So for us, we have these inversions. And as we've taken our knowledge of 30, and there's not just Omar Johnson, there's a few of us that are doing this, but as we take our knowledge, we are taming and training these LLMs to give you consistent and big, what we call culturally relevant answers.
Yeah, yeah, makes a lot of sense. And to some extent, when we were talking before, as you were talking, I was also thinking that, the intuitive or the intuitive general intelligence, however you want to define that, I think you're right, it's a long way off. But one of the things, though, that's interesting, though, is AI from an agent perspective, so agentic AI.
Yep.
There's going to be a lot of agents, and some of them are going to be more comprehensive than others. And it sounds like that's kind of where you're at, is putting together the agentic AI so that I can make the right decisions in marketing, across all of the marketing functions.
Yes, I think that's two sides of it. One, we've built a full RAG marketing operating system. So that is a pretty large architecture we've built, which can handle almost any data source as long as they're indexed correctly. And it helps us take our knowledge and deploy it in different ways. The agentic side, for me has always been about these small jobs and its interface of help. So they're much smaller versions of the bigger system that we've built. And there's obviously a combination of it. I, as a storyteller who's also building this, so much of how this system works is very much how the human system works, right? There's no person in the company outside of the CEO that knows everything. And even a CEO, he typically knows everything at a summarized level. I leverage different subject matter experts with unique training to come together and bring answers. And as we think about agent design and its operating system, we think about it almost through the lens of those roles: copywriting, strategy, sports centric copywriting, right? So giving these agents jobs. And what we discovered is the tighter you can write that job description, similar for a human, the more you can scale that role, right? Now, where the roles get really big and amorphous, CEO, president, that handles almost any task, you get a little less consistency in answers with these tools. But when you can give them really tightly defined jobs, they're actually, at least ours do, they perform really consistently.
Yeah, yeah, and that makes sense. And it is the consistency, and it's also the lack of hallucinations and making sure that the AI stays on track, for what you want as opposed to, what it kind of hallucinates. So how do you get it to fit into how do you get AI to fit into your marketing workflow? And what do you see as AI being really, really good at and maybe not so good, and maybe even offer, provide the wrong answers?
Yeah. So let's start with what I think it's good at, right? So job wise, as marketers, we're always, this is what I try and remind marketers is we're doing the work, the correlated work to AI today. We just don't always see ourselves doing it, right? So there's all these inputs that we look at as marketers. We look at consumer inputs, we look at category information, we look at past things that have happened in the past or research. We typically want to understand like macro trends. So we have a series of inputs that we always want to look at when thinking about marketing. With culturally relevant marketing, you really have to understand consumers and consumer behavior and what's happening to them, not just through the lens of demographics, but through the lens of their behavior, right? Songs, music, art, fashion, those things that drive those emotional connections. So when you think about being able to understand consumers, and to your point, things change, right? You think about people's behavior pre and post election. You think about pre and post fires in Los Angeles. It's
Hmm.
dynamic and it's hard for a marketer to keep on top of those changes every day. AI can be amazing for that, right? A lot of the way our system works is it's always keeping a beat on our customer's client and the changes so that client can see changes. And to have a human do that, I would need an army, and we can
Mm.
use machines to do that. So from a consumer perspective, that's one interesting dimension. The other one is around trends, macro trends. And macro trends happen fast. There's a speed and like they're so temporal that you've got to have sort of ongoing curated tracking. And again, our machines do that really well. So from a consumer intelligence perspective, from a macro economic trends perspective, the machines do a great job. Here's another dimension that, you know, I think can be a huge opportunity. You think about a client and all the decks a client has put together to talk about their business and their product and the specs and the users and consumer reviews. There's so much information that a client would typically have to feed a Guy or an Omar that you get to ingest in a very different way. You also get to index and organize that information. Typically, we do it mentally or through file systems and folders. Well, you can do that a lot more in a way more scalable way using some of these tools. My training has taught me the most important part of marketing aren't the ideas, it's all the inputs.
Mm.
How you
A-
organize them, how you create
Absolutely.
them. Yeah, so I've always been a bit of a nerd, and I spend way more time on the research side of a customer than I spend on the ideation side. I spend way more time understanding behavior patterns. So these machines can be immensely helpful in those tasks. because they can see a lot of information, summarize it pretty aggressively, and help you fact find against it. So when you think about the jobs connected to those, whether it's research, consumer research, some summarization, so strategy, which ends up being summarization, a lot of those roles I think can be aided immensely. We're seeing our ability to do those bodies of work, the cost to do it's cut by about 75%, which means we've been able to cut 75% of the time out of it, which is huge. I think we can get those into the upper 80s or 90s as we get more control of prompts. So that input part of the process for how do you get to a great marketing answer, AI can be extremely valuable. And to me, it is the biggest value dimension. On the creative side, the generative side, obviously, being able to say, I want to build a mood board with low camera angles, shots to create this mood and having that pop up, pretty powerful way to, I think when most marketing ideas die, there's something great in a marketing person's head that they can't get into the other person's head. So your
Hmm.
ability to take something that looks or feels out of your head through words into something that another person can appreciate is been diametrically changed. And when you think about knowing all the inputs and then being able to convince a client that this is what they should do and being able to visualize that, that's a big chunk of the creative process, right? It only leaves execution after that, which the machines can't do yet, right? Outside of programmatic. But that's a huge, when I think about the, plus $1 trillion TAM of advertising, a lot of that time is spent in those first phases where I think AI can wipe out about 75% of it. So those are the benefits of not only a system like ours, but also AI. Where it gets tough, and where you're going to have challenges are what you said. There's going to be hallucinations. There is definitely a training process that marketers have to go through to train, not just for workflow, but then also what's the tone and temperature of the creative outputs? How far do you want them to push? How far do you want them to give you consistent answers? But that's all in the marketer. And I think those can be solved. And then I think the last dimension is there's this weird positioning where the world positions agents as assistants to people. I think over time, there's a bit of an inversion where you can have a lot more agents running in the world where you as a human can assist quality control and make sure that they are optimized. So you increase your output not as a function of you doing more work, but having more tools doing work for you. So I think we actually, I'm watching strategists now move from operating one project to now they can operate four. And again, benefit, but also the tougher part is the work that has to be done to train the tools to do it. Hallucinations will always be a part of these systems, which is why you still need humans involved in the process to quality control. So, in our business, we've made sure there's still humans to help other humans. Because again, I go back to there's not many people I can walk to their boss and say, Opus told me, or Mark OS told me, or Claude told me that human side won't disappear. As long as Wall Street demands that there's a human CEO, that human CEO is going to need other humans to sort of
Yeah.
give them trust and sort of confidence.
Yeah, it's interesting as you're saying that because I mean, first there has to be humans, although maybe at some point there won't be, but my gut
I
is
agree.
that it's going to be a long, long time,
Long
and
time.
I think these machines are going to also hallucinate. It kind of reminds me of the HAL 9000, on whatever that was, what was it, 2001 or something like that, that movie, and where it doesn't where the AI just doesn't know what the answer is, and so it has to
Mixed up
make it
stuff.
up because
They mix up
you've
stuff.
told it to give me an answer, so it's going to make it up, and or there isn't any data there, so it says, well, I can make up an answer that might be right, and let them figure it out. Let them kind of figure that out. Yeah, very, very
Okay,
fascinating. So
that won't change. That won't change. I think,
yeah,
as long as these machines are told they will at some points make them up. And that's where I think humans have to continue to be involved. And again, I just think it's a bit of reorientation. I probably spend a lot more of my time looking for hallucinations now than doing desk research, but that I
yeah.
think
Yeah,
next dimension of
yeah.
work.
Well, and maybe what you could do is, and I don't know, I haven't tried that from a prompting perspective. Is kind of like just give me answers to the 80% level, and then leave off the ones that are way esoteric or something like that, or at least mark them as being esoteric, at the 1 or 2% level, and maybe that'll be a way to at least have it kind of help you to find those hallucinations. So one thing though that I'm running into is well, not running into, but as I've been investigating AI and marketing, is there's kind of the tactical side of marketing and using AI in marketing for tactics. And then there's the strategic side of using AI to really define your strategy and build it out in a significant way. Have you seen that as well? And how do you look at it as AI, in terms of being able to, take that strategy and then even build out the strategy, but also then define the campaigns and things like that?
Great question. So I'll give you two, again, marketing is always about these two different sides of the world. The first side, from a strategy perspective, strategy is typically how am I look at all the organizing lots of information to give me an answer, right? To lead me to if then like what should I do, right? So you just can see more information. You can summarize more information with AI. So from a strategy perspective, it can play a huge role in being able to see tons of information, not only from, your client, but also you can bring your knowledge to a problem. You can also bring outside knowledge. So I think from a strategy perspective, we're seeing it give us huge scale and advantages. It
Mm.
also, our outputs speak in multiple languages. So we're able to deploy strategy in multiple languages, which is that was not as easy before. On the tactic creative side, making sure there's an integrity of all those inputs into some of the outputs. And what I always call giving you a springboard. I don't think it's going to give me the full campaign in its perfection, but going from nothing, which is a client asking me a question, to here's all the data and information. Here's how it gets summarized into something that can be acted upon. And here's some great creative outputs that match that brand, match that target consumer, match their consumption, matches the budget. I can get to those things a lot faster on the tactic side. And what we tell our clients is it's going to get you about 75% of the way there. Now, if you think about the time savings, it's 90% cheaper than what you pay an advertising agency. So I take a 75% probability to cut out 90% of the cost. And then that's where I think us as humans
Well, I
come
have to
into the
interrupt you
process.
there. Sorry. You might take out 90% of the cost, right? But the thing with an ad agency, especially marketing, it's not the cost, it's the opportunity. Because I might save, let's say $500,000 on my agency fees. But if I get that wrong, the cost and revenue could be in billions. And so, I don't know if I would agree with how you did the math there.
Mhm.
And of course, I'm a marketer, so
No,
my
I get it.
marketing
I
stuff is
get it.
incredibly valuable.
I get it. I get it. And look, here's what I'd say. We've got business cases, right? So we've done campaigns at a huge discount to others. Again, it's the jobs, right? So when you look across all the jobs, I, as a marketer, pride myself in this company on research, on really understanding our consumers. A lot of our costs were driven by us understanding consumers, trends, what's happening in market, what's happening in culture. I've now trained products that can go out and grab that information for me and bring it back to me, right? That process alone, because again, our company prides itself on that function. There's a lot of companies that pride themselves on creative and putting things out. We believe the more we can bring in information wise and the more we can bring our thought patterns and culture relevant thought patterns to it, the better the outputs happen. So again, for every company, it may be different, right? We tend to spend our time obsessing about consumer and return on investment. And while I think a lot of other marketers would say they spend a lot of time on return on investment, they just, in my past career as a CMO, watching a lot of advertising agencies and paying a lot of money to advertising agencies, there's a lot of ideation work that happens. And they make it my job to tell them if it strategically lines up with my business problems. I always wanted to focus on the opposite side. What are the business problems, consumer? And again, these machines have been immense at understanding that
Yeah,
part. That's
yeah.
where our speed comes from. So on the output side, and then when you think about opportunity, and I get your point with opportunity and some of the things that you may see along the way that may spark a big idea. I'm not a big fan of AI where you put in one thing and it spits out a lot of things. I like a little bit of traceability. So I want to understand what's guided that model's output because then I'm interchanging, right, inputs to get me to different answers versus having the creative go back to the drawing board. So again, I think for our marketing process, which is consumer obsessed and culture obsessed, we've been able to have huge speed advantages driven by not having humans keep on top of what's happening in hip hop music and what's happening in sports and what's happening in the conversion to two, what's happening in fashion, all those spaces that require someone to be reading every day, every
Mm.
moment, get really expensive.
Yeah, yeah. So,
And
I mean, exactly. Let me just change the topic just a tad. So, do you see that there's maybe some different industries where AI is maybe more applicable or less applicable? Anything that comes to mind there?
look, I think knowledge work, if there's a person on the other end of a question that has to take in lots of information, synthesize, and give you back an answer, I think these tools can be immensely helpful. HR is a field which, again, there's a lot of information lost when people come and leave companies, a lot of information lost just by human information transfer.
Mm.
So knowledge work in a lot of industries, I think, can be impacted by these tools.
Yeah, yeah,
And
definitely. But what about an industry, in marketing? Now, just let's focus on marketing. Do you see any specific industries? Because a couple come to mind for me
yeah,
where, unfortunately, you got regulated industries and, the regulators just don't understand the world. I'm
yeah.
sorry. If you're a regulator out there, I'm sorry, but regulators don't understand the speed of business and the speed of marketing. And if you're in a regulated industry like banking or financial services or healthcare, you're never going to figure out. You're always going to be behind.
So moving, right, it moves. It moves on you.
Yeah, in a big way. Yeah.
Again, so here's, I'll give you a couple. I think it's going to disrupt a lot of how marketing works. I believe that, right? Not everybody does, but I think almost everything up until I have a camera shooting a person. So when I have another human to manage, I think machines will struggle with that. But the process of problem solving, bringing in inputs, synthesizing those inputs, building a strategy around it, directly driving where creative should go from a scripting perspective, output perspective, spec perspective, I think you're going to see huge time advantages driven by AI. So I tend to look at the big marketing process and me as an executive starting off with a problem that needs to get to a creative answer I can then sell into sales and other teams. That's where I think you're going to see huge advantage. I think it's going to touch every dimension of that. The same way digital and, first was the internet and then social media touched almost every function in
Mm.
marketing outside of, to your point, like person stand here, here's light, shoot camera. But it shifted that whole workflow. Social media had a huge impact, right? SaaS has been the next big dimension of speed and change or more efficiency in work. And I think AI is the next big dimension of, like I said, speed, change, precision, and scale.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what about trust? So, if you're the CMO and or maybe one or two levels down, depending on the size of your organization, how do you, as you're implementing AI, and I think just about everybody is really trying to grasp and implement, either big things or little things, and how can the top level executives in marketing and even maybe the CMO, the CEO, and maybe some of the other C-suite, how can they really say, I trust this answer. I'm about
Yeah.
to build a plant to produce that product that you said that AI helped you with, and we're going to invest, $50 million in doing that. How do you build trust, for them to say, "Yep, I'm ready to, to pull the plug on, or I'm ready to, to plug that in right now."
Right. Great question. So again, I think there's a parallel to how the human experience works. And it's less about is the AI right or wrong? And the questions I end up asking is what information was it trained on and how is it trained? That's how I every day deploy my trust. So it's not a function of AI and the machine that was built by whether it's Sam Altman or someone else. What was it trained by, right? Who did the training and how was it trained? Because once I know that, I then have the breadcrumbs of the decision making and I can define what a hallucination is or what's a stretch of like, a good stretch of thought. But it all goes back to me as a marketer to know. But again, I go back to when I say the human vector of this is I don't just walk up to anybody in the organization and say, hey, can you help me solve an engineering problem? I go and I ask the person from Stanford or Georgia Tech or MIT the engineering problem. Because one, I know how it was trained. I know when they were trained, and I know they're pretty good when they get trained. And I think these are questions that executives have to start to ask. So again, I think that the part that I've been trying to teach marketers is the work is on us to do this work. It's not that the machine's not going to magically figure it out.
Yeah.
And if it does,
Yeah.
it's actually scary, right? But if we do the work of training and understanding what that means, and we can judge what a good and trustable answer looks like. So
Well,
that's my
we talked
version.
about earlier. We talked about the value that the process has that McKinsey uses or these consulting companies use, and as I learned, and I think you did too, is that process is about building trust and
Yes.
selling the solution into the organization.
Yes.
And in a similar way, that's exactly what you're saying
It
is
is.
that once I know what the data was, I know what the theory was and the concepts behind the training, and I know who, did the development of the model, then that series of activities is what's going to really build trust into, yep, I'm ready to plop down 50 million on this plant because I think we've got a good chance of really, being successful out there. Especially when you think that 80% of the products fail,
Yeah.
that come out.
And Guy, look, I think if you're hiring an agency, at the end of the day, there is going to be some belief and trust. You don't know that
Yeah,
the answer is going
yeah,
to work,
yeah.
right?
No,
So
that's
to your
true.
point, it's the methodology, the past success, the
Yep,
trophies, the awards. You're betting on that, right? Because
yep.
you don't always know, as you know. So you're still making a bit of a bet. And I love what you said because it is about the trust to me comes from the understanding of what the inputs were and how those inputs are representing themselves in the answer. But I think that's the work that we do, right? So Opus Intelligence is built in a lot of ways to mimic Omar Johnson's point of view on marketing and culture relevant marketing. It does it really well and it's really consistent to me. Is it always perfect for your company? Maybe not, right? Culture relevant marketing has worked more times than not working because of the way it taps into emotion. However, the one thing I can tell you is that it's consistent based on how I think. And as we add more thought leaders, I can say, yes, it's consistent to the way that person thinks. But that's essentially what the trust vector comes from Omar Johnson's success or Guy's success in the past, not the machine, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. I hate to say it. We've got to cut this a little bit short. I think we're going to have to
Cool.
do another second, maybe a third or a fourth session. This has been absolutely phenomenal. And, I've been writing notes down here on what you've been saying, and thoughts are just going like crazy. Maybe my AI is starting to hallucinate. I don't know.
Oh, look,
But
I enjoy, I'll tell you two things I enjoy. I enjoy questions, but more importantly, I enjoy disagreement. So let's go find some more things we
yeah,
disagree on
that's right. I'm ready. I don't care
and
what
have
you
some
say.
fun.
I disagree with that.
But Guy, I think that's the only way we move forward, right? It's like you
Yeah,
need
yeah.
a little bit of friction in these
Yep,
topics
yep.
to move this industry forward. So, and I think any industry, right? And they never move forward through just consensus, right? We're watching
Yeah.
that happen in some countries. So for me, find some things we disagree on. Let's go have some fun and let's chat
Absolutely.
about it.
Yeah. Well, I do have one last question for you, and that
Please.
is, I used to ask, what advice would you give an up and coming new marketer? But
Yes.
what advice would you give a new market or a younger marketer, who's been in maybe the market for, been working for a little bit, and to help them manage their boss? because there's always the management down, but there's also I got to
Not,
manage up, right? Especially if I've got a boss that is maybe new in the position, or hasn't doesn't really have experience, or they've got other things going on. How do I manage up?
and I'm thinking you want me to snap this around our conversation around AI
Yeah,
marketing,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
It's Look, I think it's very similar to the last answer I just gave you, which is all too often I've been a problem here also because Omar Johnson goes, "We have AI." That means nothing. Okay. If you're managing up, hey, say you're my boss, guy, I'm presenting a campaign to you. Here's all the data I looked at. Here's all the inputs I use. Here's the sort of time period I focused on. Guy, here are some of the strategic documents that I use from our business to drive this idea that I'm going to give you. I also I did some desk research, or I also looked at some trends. I pulled all these things together, and as I got to the other side of it, these outputs are a result of all that information. Now, if you explain it to your boss that way, we've been explaining things to our boss that way for the last since the age of
Well,
this.
hopefully we have. Yes.
But this is no, but no, guy, you just hit it. You just hit it. All right. Before we just said the answer. But
Mm,
because the boss and us, we had to do the same work to kind of get there, there's just assumption that they did the work. You
mm.
assume that they read the books, they read the research,
Yep.
they did the
Yep.
work, right? Now, if I show up with that answer in a day versus a week, how'd you get it done? And obviously, we're using machines to do it. But I think the explaining what you're doing with the AI versus saying AI, AI, AI
Mm.
helps you create that trust vector and also helps you manage your boss.
Yeah.
Because notice I gave an entire thought process on how I got to what I want to present to you today, Guy. I never said the word AI. I talked to you about the inputs. I talked to you about the data sources and some of the knowledge bases. So if you want to look at it from an AI perspective, that's the AI definition of what I said. But I said it to you in a very simple, understandable, digestible way where you can say, Omar, why don't you include last year's report? Omar, did you include this research? You can then engage me in that conversation. And
Yeah.
I teach, I'm even having these conversations with people that work for me now. It's like, you're going to do a lot of the same job, but you now have different tools to do it. So you shouldn't be thinking about the, you know, manual for how to work with me. You can load that, and that can be what you use to get answers. So you don't have to read it every week to understand what to do. So again, I just think it's we have to get off of the using the word and talking about AI as the answer and talking about the work that it helps us do and talking about what we were able to take from it to get to an answer. I think as we focus on that, then you can manage up effectively. Because
Yeah.
then the
Yeah.
conversation becomes about data sources and what you included versus what you didn't include, tone and temperature, and how far you let the machines go. You both at the same moment have a pretty clear understanding of what hallucinations look like because you have an expectation of the output, because you fed it things. So, a young marketer, I'd advise you to not walk into your office and boss's office and talk about AI, but talk about what you used AI to do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you don't understand it, go understand it. Because the only way to understand hallucination from not hallucination is to understand what it's processing, how it's processing it. So again, back to the work the marketer has to do. We have to go and do that work to know what a quality answer looks like. Again, we did this as humans before. We didn't walk up to a copywriter and said, draw me an anime commercial. You walked to a copywriter and said, write me some copy. You
Mm.
didn't go to a strategist and say, give me a mood board for the commercial that you want to shoot, right? We went to someone else for that. And we took advantage of that curated knowledge that that person has. So marketers have been playing in AI before AI. They haven't made the mental switch over to like, I have these curated knowledge groups that I can tap into to answer questions and also bring them all together to give me creative outputs. I think we have a lot less of an intellectual leap to make than some of us may perceive. It's just
Mm.
scary because, you now have a new machine that's doing a lot of what you did as a human.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like that. That's great. Wow. I really appreciate it. You know, my mind is just going like crazy right now. You've given me tons of ideas and I'm trying to write them down. Hopefully I'll remember them all and I'll keep coming up with some more. That was fantastic. So thank you, Omar, for participating. Really appreciate it.
Thank you,
And
Guy.
oh, absolutely. So where can folks reach you and learn more about you and your company?
So, funny enough, we've been in stealth for a while. We're now starting to merge out of stealth. So, stay tuned for opusintelligence.com. And I'm updating my LinkedIn page weekly. So, we're doing more things with big car brands, big sports brands. So, we're now starting to get into a little
Wow.
bit more public momentum. Look, I think some people build things in the vacuum of like knowing the right thing to do. I've always been a fan of like building things with customers. So we've been building with some big multinational brands and exposing them to Opus Intelligence before we bring it to the world. So I just advise everybody to stay tuned for Opus Intelligence. Opusintelligence.com is our website. It's evolving pretty quickly, and then you can always find Opus Intelligence through Omar Johnson, and I'm on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Omar, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So, for the audience, please stay tuned for many other videos in this series on the backstory of marketing and AI. And please go to marketingmachine.prorelevant.com and find out more about my upcoming book, The AI Marketing Machine. Omar, again, thank you so much.
Looking forward to it. Looking forward to the book.
Yeah, yeah, me too.
Cheers. Talk soon.